Okay, right. So the title of my talk is going to be the prevention of hearing loss and its impact on dementia. Right. Just to get everyone's attention, let's start with a short video. Okay, so do control the volume on your devices.
我今年70岁，有一个美好的家庭。我最骄傲的就是我的宝贝阿波，长得又可爱又聪明，琴又弹得这么厉害。
妈，为什么电视又开那么大声？跟你讲了几千次了。什么？啊？阿波又在练琴啦，吵死人了！
Hello， 你们回来吃饭吗？今天阿婆生日。回来呀、我煮。
我是就事论事，当没有什么没有真爱。
怎么现在才回？饿了吧？快点来吃。不是跟你讲不回来吃吗？你干嘛煮这么多？冰箱里都没味了，真是的。
儿子，我年纪大了，不中用了，耳朵又不好，常常听不清楚你们在说什么。我不能分享你们生活里的烦恼，也知道自己带给你们很多麻烦。孩子们，对不起，我不想成为你们的负担，所以我走了。 真的弹得很好。
Right. Did you enjoy the video? I hope you did. Do you think that the video was made professionally? Well, actually, no. What happened was a few years ago, we had a group of medical students from NUS who did their attachment at Tock Seng, and they were so inspired after the attachment, and they wanted to do something to promote the cause for hearing, that they came up with this video. So I thought it's quite a sweet video to share. So my next slide, essentially, if you suspect that you have hearing loss, go get yourself tested. If your hearing loss is impacting your communication, hearing aids can help you reconnect with your family and society. You will find it harder to wear hearing aid for the first time if you have left your hearing loss for a long time, and if your hearing loss is very severe. So it's important to note that hearing loss is actually a significant risk factor for dementia. And on the other side, if you already have dementia, it will be a lot harder for you to start using hearing aids. And that's the end of my talk. Well, actually, no. That's the summary of my talk. So for those of you, if you don't have much time, this is essentially what the summary is going to be, what my talk is going to be about, right? If you are interested to hear more, please stay on and join me. So let me start by introducing myself a little bit more. I think as Yu Ping has mentioned, I'm an ENT doctor, but as I get older, I'm perhaps more of an E doctor now, and I'm focusing more of my work on ear conditions. I still see patients with nose and throat problems, but probably not the major part of my work. So my main clinical and academic interest is in helping patients with hearing loss and dizziness. And really, if you ask me what is my life aspiration, really I'm trying to just do my part to help our Singapore society, our population that is aging quite rapidly, and to help everyone maintain good health physically and mentally. So my motto is, it's not just about adding years to life, right? It's not about just having a very long life, but it's about adding life to your years, adding meaning, adding quality of life. And I try to do this not just in my role as a doctor at Tock Seng Hospital, but as part of my national service, I regularly give public talks, and also I write articles for the media. And from time to time, I help to organize hearing screening events in Singapore. But of course, with the current COVID-19 situation, it will probably be a long time before we can have one of these screening events. And also, I do believe in helping our neighbors. So I do go to our neighboring countries like the Philippines, Sri Lanka, Indonesia, Cambodia, and provide free medical and surgical services to our poor communities in our neighboring countries. So I just wanted to mention that a lot of what I'm going to mention today, if you are interested to find out more, do look up for the media article on the internet. Because I've written a lot over the years, and if you have a subscription to Straits Times, for example, yeah, so there should be a lot of articles over there. So my latest article was in January this year. And last year, there were also a few articles. And in particular, one of the articles that got a lot of attention was the one explaining the link between dementia and hearing loss, and how, well, despite the link being there, I think majority of people in Singapore are not aware of the link. And also a lot of the people with hearing loss are not treating their hearing loss with hearing aids. And this article also appeared in the Chinese press, and also in Berita Harian, the Malay newspaper. And then 2 years ago, there was an article on dizziness, 2017. Again, more articles on dizziness then. 2017, an article on hearing devices in Today. More articles in 2017, 2016, prevention of hearing loss, especially the noise-induced hearing loss. 2014, more articles on hearing loss, dizziness, and so on. So I put the link below, so you're welcome to look up all these articles if you want to find out more. Yes, sorry. Yeah, coming to the end now. Okay, right. Okay. So actually today I'm going to be talking about both hearing loss and dementia. Let me start by saying a few things about dementia first. I think most of these facts I'm going to present to you, you would probably be aware of them already. For example, how common is dementia in Singapore? The latest statistics from last year, I think for the elderly, or at least the older population, those who are older than 60 is 1 in 10 who has dementia. So that would be our parents and grandparents or great-grandparents. And many studies from around the world shows that dementia gets commoner the older the population is, especially once they go above the age of 65. And one of the studies from Western countries showed that when they studied the number of people with dementia in their population, 80% of their entire dementia population are in people older than 75. So you may think, well, they are quite old, aren't they? I mean, isn't it normal to have dementia as you get older? But I think it's important to stress the point that dementia is and should not be a normal part of aging. even though it's commoner as people get older, because there are many things that can be done to reduce dementia, to reduce the chances of getting dementia. So let's look at our Singapore population. You probably heard things like the silver tsunami, right? And we all accept that Singapore is aging fast, and the proportion of people who are above the age of 65, about 5 years ago, it was 1 in 7. But 15 years from now, in 2035, it's going to be 1 in 3. And well, 30 years from now, 2050, where hopefully most of us are still going to be around, 1 in 2 of the Singapore population will be above the age of 65. That's quite a interesting thought, isn't it? If you think about it, I know where I will be in that half. I will be in the above 65 half, right? And some of you may be in the below 65, but 1 in 2 of us will be above the age of 65. So what does that mean for dementia in Singapore? Well, according to a study done in 2014, at that time, the number of people with dementia in Singapore is about 50,000. And they projected that that will increase by 5 times by the year 2050. So by 2050, we will have 250,000 people with dementia. You may think, is it that big? Is it that many? Well, with that sort of numbers, right? Either we ourselves will be the one with the dementia, or we will be looking after a family member with dementia. So that is quite a sobering thought. Okay, symptoms of dementia. Well, I think most of you would probably already know, but just a quick revision. I think often the thing that may first alert people that they may be losing their memory is that they tend to be more forgetful about certain events. They have make appointments, you know. They may forget people's name, or even worse, if they forget people's faces, forgetting to do certain things. They may start to misplace things. I'm sure we all do that, you know, but when people have dementia, they do that a lot, and they do that all the time. And they get disorientated with time and place, you know. Sometimes they struggle to tell you the year. When it gets more severe, they struggle to tell you the month. But once they struggle to tell you, you know, the week, the day, and the time, that's usually when the dementia is quite severe, and it would be really bad if the person with dementia does not know where they are, whether they're at home or in the hospital. And as the dementia progresses, they will struggle with routine activities or tasks that we take for granted, like cleaning the house, taking a bath, you know, looking after ourselves, brushing our teeth. And they will have less and less capability to solve problems. And of course, if they happen to be still working, their work performance is going to decline significantly, and it would soon become very obvious to their colleagues and their reporting officers. And of course, there will also be changes in behavior and mood, and sometimes this can be quite an early thing to note as well. They tend to become more, I suppose, short-tempered sometimes. They get more frustrated, more angry, more withdrawn, you know, more antisocial in their behavior. And ultimately, this can lead to them withdrawing from their family and social activities. Some of you may have family members or friends with dementia, and I'm sure you can relate very well to all these symptoms. Okay, at this point, I'd like to take the opportunity to remind everyone that Brahm Center does provide dementia screening, and you just need to get onto the Facebook or onto the website and to get more information about how you can get yourself screened, either at Brahm Center or at other centers that may be more convenient to you. Okay, the next few slides are perhaps slightly more academic. I suppose I do quite a lot of research, so I apologize if the slides are maybe a little bit complex, but I will try to simplify and explain things to you. I think it's not just in Singapore that we are taking a strong interest in dementia. There have been a lot of good quality studies done around the world to look at this impending health problem. And one of the most important scientific publications in the last few years was a paper in the Lancet, which is one of the most reputable medical journal in the world, where they reviewed more than 600 papers into dementia, and they tried to look into the prevention, intervention, and care for patients with dementia. I'm sharing this paper because this paper had a very, very interesting finding. And this is what they found. They found that hearing loss is the most important modifiable risk factor for dementia. And I think when this finding came out, this shocked a lot of people, including doctors, because up to that point, I think a lot of people wouldn't even suspect that hearing loss is a risk factor for dementia. But then this important study actually found that it is the most important risk factor. Okay, now it's important to just stress some of the scientific points about this dementia and hearing loss. This study have found that about a third of patients with dementia have potentially modifiable risk factors. This would mean that 2/3 of patients with dementia, their risk factors are not modifiable. So actually, it's quite unfortunate for these 2/3 of patients where the risk factors are not modifiable. But when you consider the number of patients who are going to get dementia, this 1/3 is a large group of patients still that we should try to do something about. And they found that in this 1/3 of patients where they have modifiable risk factors, it means that they have things about their life, their lifestyle, their health conditions that we can do something about. We meaning both healthcare professionals like doctors, allied health, but also patients themselves. So this study found that hearing loss, I put there HL, is the single largest potentially modifiable risk factor for dementia. And interestingly, they found that the second most modifiable risk factor is actually education in the early stage of your life, meaning that having preschool education and primary school education is also an important risk factor for future dementia. So of course, this point is important, especially for developing countries, is to tell government that they should be investing in education, especially for the very young children. But within the Singapore context, I think education is well provided for. The important matter here is that when we have a patient with hearing loss coming to see us, especially the elderly patients, at this point, there's little, I think it's pointless trying to tell the patient, hey, uncle, you should have studied harder when you were younger. Then you can reduce your risk of dementia, right? So this early education, whilst it's important, is for the future, right? So for the current patients that we have now, they cannot go back in time and study harder, stay in school for longer. But what they can do then is to think about their hearing loss, because that is the most important risk factor now. And this study also found that overall, about 1/4 of the preventable dementia cases can be prevented by treating the hearing loss. So I think this is a very important statistics, and it's something that I have shared with many doctors, and I'm glad I get to share with you all today as well. There was another important study that came out about 9 years ago from the Johns Hopkins University, where they look at hearing loss and dementia. And the study was carried out in Baltimore, and it's called the Baltimore Longitudinal Study of Aging. And what they did was they had 639 adults with no dementia, and they followed up this patient up for 12 years, which is a very long time, because I can tell you that as a doctor and scientist, it's very hard to follow up patients for that length of time, right? And what they found was those patients who had hearing loss at the beginning of the study, right? That means 12 years before the end of the study. They found that for every 10 decibel is a way of us measuring the loudness the sound needs to be before the patients can hear, right? So for every 10 decibel of hearing loss that these people have, right, they have a 1.27 times increased risk of dementia 12 years later. You may think, oh, what's this 1.27? I find it a bit confusing, but let me put that the conclusion of the study in hopefully a way that everyone can understand. So essentially what this study told us is that compared to people with normal hearing, right, those with hearing loss are more likely to develop dementia. How much more likely are they? Well, those with mild hearing loss are 2 times more likely. Those with moderate hearing loss, 3 times more likely. And those with severe hearing loss, 5 times more likely. That is very shocking statistics. There are many other studies done in Western populations that have essentially shown the same results in Europe, and some of the studies, they would have followed the patient for 15, 17 years. It's interesting that when I shared this data with some of the doctors in Singapore, some of them say, oh, well, Singaporeans are different. Maybe our risk factor for dementia and hearing loss is different. They say the data for the Angmo, right, the Caucasian population may not apply to us. But guess what? In 2017, there was a paper published as well from Singapore, right? It's a study conducted by NUS. It's called the Singapore Longitudinal Aging Study, where they look at 2,599 adults over the age of 55. And in this group, 1,515 of them were cognitively normal, meaning that they had no dementia at the start of the study. And they followed these patients up for 8 years. And they found that those individuals with hearing loss at the start of the study, they were 2.3 times more likely to develop dementia or mild cognitive impairment. That means mild dementia. And at the end of the study, they found that they also found that at the beginning of the study, those patients who already had dementia, compared to those with no dementia, were 3.6 times more likely to have hearing loss. So I think all these studies show a very strong link between dementia and hearing loss. Now, what is the situation with hearing loss in Singapore? I think the most reliable data is if you look at the National Health Survey conducted by MOH every 6 to 7 years. The latest study that I could have data on hearing was unfortunately 2010. Because the latest study done in 2017, they didn't collect data on hearing loss, which is quite unfortunate if you ask me. But anyway, let's look at the 2010 data. They found that overall, when they look at all the, when they survey the Singaporeans in the society, they found that 1 in 30 adult Singaporeans have disabling hearing loss. Now, this disabling hearing loss is an important concept because it's the level of hearing loss that the World Health Organization recommends that they should be wearing hearing aid. So it's not just any mild hearing loss, because if you look at mild hearing loss, the numbers are even higher. But I presented to you the numbers that are relevant. And they found that overall it's about 3%, right, of Singaporeans, adult Singaporeans have hearing loss. But what they found is when they look at the Singaporeans in the different age group, they find that as they get older and older, those in the age group, the hearing loss becomes commoner and commoner. So for example, if you are between the age of 30 to 39, less than 1% of you would have a disabling hearing loss. But by the time you're in your 60 to 69, it's nearly 10%. Unfortunately, the study from back then did not show the data for those who are older than 70, but data from other countries would show that these numbers are much, much higher, often going up into 20, 30, 40% in the older group of people. The interesting thing as well is that when they surveyed these 1 in 30 Singaporeans with a disabling hearing loss, more than 2/3 of them say, oh, they did not feel that they had any hearing loss at all. And interestingly, in this group of the 1 in 30 adult Singaporeans who have this degree of hearing loss, only 3.3% of them were wearing hearing aid. So it shows that hearing loss is actually very common, but of those with the hearing loss that are severe enough, very few of them are treating the hearing loss with hearing aid. So I have done some study as well. So back in 2018, I published a paper about hearing impairment and hearing loss and hearing aid usage in Singapore. So some of the summary from my paper was we look at more than 1,000 patients who were first-time hearing aid users in Singapore. And we found that the vast majority of them were very elderly, right? More than the age of 70. and they had pretty advanced level of hearing loss by the time they seek help for their hearing loss for the first time and having their first ever set of hearing aid fitted. And this data goes back to like 2013, and around that time we found that the number of patients who were wearing 2 hearing aids were very low, less than 20%, despite the majority of them having hearing loss in both ears. But what was more worrying is that the usage of hearing aid were low, on a daily basis compared to other developing countries. So this is quite worrying about Singapore, right? Because 97% of patients with hearing loss in Singapore are not wearing hearing aid, number one. And for those who are wearing hearing aid, most of them are wearing only one. And also for those who are wearing, most of them are not wearing the hearing aid for very long every day. So definitely there's a problem in Singapore. And then I published a second paper in the same year. And this one is just trying to let us understand our Singapore population a bit more. And as you know, in Singapore, conveniently, the ethnicity, we are divided into the CMIO classification, right? And they found that the Malay patients tend to present later. They had more severe hearing loss before they were seeking help. And those who fall into the others ethnicity, they tend to present earlier. So that was an interesting observation. And interestingly, as well, they found that the older patients, they tend to have worse hearing loss before they seek help compared to the younger patients. So this was interesting. Younger patients, they were seeking help earlier, but probably because they are still working, I don't know. That's why they feel that they needed to have something done about the hearing loss. And they also found that the younger patients and those with worse hearing were more likely to use their hearing aids regularly. Okay, right. Now, this is the important question then that a lot of people ask me, both doctors and patients. How and why is hearing loss linked to dementia, right? So they ask me, does hearing loss cause dementia, or is it dementia that causes hearing loss, right? So actually, there are 3 theories. When you look at the scientific evidence, the scientific papers, the first theory is that people with the same diseases, right? So those who have the diseases that will cause, for example, narrowing of your blood vessels. For example, if you got diabetes, you got high blood pressure, you got high cholesterol. Now, these 3 conditions will lead to a rapid narrowing of your blood vessels if you don't treat them, right? And this accelerated narrowing of your blood vessels is an important cause of dementia, but it can also cause hearing loss because it would this narrowed blood vessel would limit the blood flow to the brain and also limit the blood flow to the ear, right? And patients can also have like little strokes in different parts of the brain, and this will speed up the onset of dementia. And similarly, they may well have like little strokes in the ear that would speed up the hearing loss. So this is one theory that I think is important because it's also to stress the point that it's not always clear-cut that hearing loss causes dementia, because the same process that causes dementia can cause hearing loss. However, there are 2 other theories, and I think these 2 theories are important as well. The second theory is that those people with hearing loss and they don't treat the hearing loss, this tend to lead to them communicating less with their family members and friends and society in general, and ultimately leads to social isolation. And many studies have already shown that social isolation is a very, very powerful risk factor for dementia. Okay. The third theory is that those people with hearing loss and they don't treat it, right? Whenever they have to talk to someone else, whenever they have to hold a conversation, they really struggle to understand what the other person is saying. So they have to divert a lot of their cognitive energy, a lot of their mental energy to try to understand what the other person is saying. So if they were to have a long conversation, say an hour, by the end of the hour, they will be so tired because all their brain energy is exhausted in trying to understand what the other person is saying. And this phenomenon is certainly very true. A lot of my patients with hearing loss will tell me that they don't like to have long conversations because they find it tiring. And so this is the theory that these patients, because their mental energy, the cognitive function is all diverted to understanding what people are saying, that they tend to get a lot of mental fatigue. And then this also can lead to dementia. So these are the three theories. And I think the truth is that most scientists would say that for most people, in all those studies that show the very strong link, the association between hearing loss and dementia, is probably a combination of these three theories together, right? For some people, it may be more of the first theory. For others, it may be more of the second and third theory. So it's probably a combination of these three. That's why those with hearing loss are more likely to get dementia. So that fact is proven, but the exact how and why, these are the three theories, and we still don't know the exact proportion, the importance of each of these three different theories towards the contribution of hearing loss as a risk factor for dementia. So this is also another important question that I get asked. Patients and also my colleagues will ask me, so doctor, if I were to wear hearing aid, does that mean I can reduce my risk of dementia? So my answer to them is, I say very, very likely, but the scientific evidence is not very clear at the moment. This is $1 million question. And the reason why it's $1 million question is no center in the world, right, that the universities or the academic hospitals around the world has no scientist has ever done a study to prove that if you wear hearing aid, you can reduce your risk of dementia. Now you may think, hey, this is such an important area. Why is no one doing this study? Actually, the study can be done, but there are many ethical constraints that prevent studies like this nowadays. So to design a good quality study to show that using hearing aid will reduce the risk of dementia, you need to plan a study with a large number of patients. For example, like 2,000 or 3,000 people with hearing loss, right? And then you need to randomize them and say, okay, you flip a coin. You go into group A, you go into group B, right? And so every one of that 2,000 patients, you flip the coin and you either say you go to group A or group B. Then you say group A, we give you hearing aid. Group B, we don't give you hearing aid. And we are going to follow you up for 10 to 15 years. And the one that is in group B, you are not allowed to get hearing aid yourself. The one in group A, we give you the hearing aid, you use the hearing aid. So I'm sure even if you're not a doctor or a scientist, you can already imagine that, ooh, this is the sort of study that we need to do to prove that wearing hearing aid can prevent dementia. So I think for a lot of scientists and doctors around the world, they would have thought about doing this sort of studies. In fact, I have spoken to many other doctors in other universities to discuss, the ideas of doing a study like this. And they all agree on this point that everyone has this idea that we should be doing the study, but it's very hard to justify doing this sort of study. And it's very hard to be granted the permission to do this sort of studies in a country like Singapore or many of the other developed Western countries, because we as a doctor, as a scientist, there are very strict rules that govern what sort of research and what sort we are allowed to do and what sort of research we are not allowed to do. So such a study to prove this point, I'm afraid it's going to be very hard to do. And it will likely be many, many years before we can get a definite answer. So my reply to patients when they ask me, should I wear a hearing aid to reduce my risk of dementia? I say, well, I would say it's likely to. I cannot give you a definite answer maybe for another 10 to 15 years, but do you want to take the risk and have an increased risk of dementia by not treating your hearing loss? Okay, I just want to share some data from the World Health Organization about hearing loss, just to let you know how big it is a problem. They have found that 5% of the world's population, right, or nearly 500 million people, have disabling hearing loss, meaning that that's the level of hearing loss that they ought to be treated. And then once in those who are above the age of 65, this level goes up to like 30%. And then by 2050, the number of people with this severe hearing loss is expected to reach nearly 1 billion, right? And what is the social economic cost to the world? In 2016, the total cost of this hearing loss problem is about 750 billion US dollars, right? So it has a profound impact on society. Now, I'm an ENT doctor, as I said earlier, and the vast majority of my patients have either hearing problems or dizziness. So perhaps I'd like to share with you some of the challenges that I face at work. So the two biggest challenges I face at work is, number one, trying to convince my patients with hearing problem, hearing impaired, that they have the problem, right? Because they'll say, no, I don't have the problem, doctor. Even after you've done the test, they say, no, I don't have a problem. And then number two, after you manage to convince them that there is a problem, is to convince them to accept treatment for the hearing loss, which for the vast majority is using a hearing aid. So these are the constant challenges I face day to day. I spend 80 to 90% of my time in the clinic trying to convince my patients on these 2 points. Now, these are some of the common things my patients say to me, and some of you may be able to relate to these sentences. They'll tell me that, hey, doctor, if my friends, my family, they see me wear hearing aids, they will think I'm deaf. Right? Interesting point. Then they say, doctor, if I wear the hearing aid, will that slow down my hearing loss? I think that's a reasonable question. Then number three is quite interesting. They say that, doctor, I'm afraid that if I were to start wearing hearing aid and I wear them all the time, my ears will get used to them, and then the ears will forget how to hear. So when I'm not wearing the hearing aids, I cannot hear anymore. It's a very interesting point, right? I don't know whether if any of you have thought I have maybe the same thoughts as well, but let me give you some facts to clarify the 3 points. So the first one is this thing about people, if I'm wearing hearing aid, people will think I'm deaf. So the truth is that if you have a hearing loss and you treat the hearing loss, you wear hearing aid and you can hear properly, then you are no longer deaf. The one who is not wearing the hearing aid is the deaf person, right? Then will the hearing loss slow down my hearing? Will the hearing aids slow down my hearing loss? Right? What hearing aids do is that they will allow you to hear better with whatever hearing function that you have left. Using hearing aids will neither speed up or slow down your hearing loss. Most of us will lose our hearing as we get older, right? And we'll continue to go down. But if you use the hearing aid, you will just hear better, right? Even as your hearing deteriorates. Number three, I think the number three is a very interesting point. And the truth is that this phenomenon probably happens because they may have spoken to someone who's wearing a hearing aid and who will say, hey, I'm wearing the hearing aid, I can hear so well. But when I'm not wearing the hearing aid, I don't hear that well. So I think it's the fact that when you wear hearing aid, you can hear much better. And then when you're not wearing, you are then reminded of how bad your hearing is when you're not wearing them. So it's not the case that your ears get used to the hearing aid and it forgets how to hear when you're not wearing them. Okay, so these are the three sort of like points, the myths that patients have, and I thought I would raise it up because I suspect some of you may have the same thoughts as well. Okay, four commonest causes of hearing loss, right? I think that may be of interest to you. I think the first and the commonest would be aging. So unfortunately, this is universal. Every one of us will age, right? We are all aging right now. It's just that some of us are further on in the journey. Some of us are at the early stages of aging. Noise exposure. So ear infections, toxic stuff. Okay, so let's look at age-related hearing loss. The term that we use is presbyacusis. So essentially, it just represents all the cumulative effect of aging on the hearing organ or the cochlea, right? Probably some degree of narrowing of the blood vessels, a bit of noise exposure, maybe some ear infections, maybe we have taken some toxic medication in our life. All these will add up. And this term that we use for presbyacusis, I suppose it covers all the impact on aging on our human body. Noise exposure, this can come with either working in a noisy environment. For example, if you work in the shipyard or some noisy factories, construction is another one. Or more worrying, recreational noise. Now, what do I mean by recreational noise? This is when you listen to music your headphone or your earpiece. And unfortunately, a lot of younger people, they are having the volume too high and they are at risk of future hearing loss. Ear infections, if you are unlucky enough to have repeated infections in your ears and you don't get that treated, yes, that can also lead to hearing loss. And in fact, in many developing countries, chronic ear infection is a major cause of hearing loss. So in Singapore, fortunately, with the good healthcare and public health that we have, this chronic ear infection is a lot less common compared to like 50 years ago. And toxic stuff, I would mean things like certain medication, like chemotherapy and radiotherapy, antibiotics, certain antibiotics, these can be quite toxic. So again, some of us may need to be on this medication at some point in our life. For example, if we have a nasty infection, or if we have cancer and we need treatment with chemotherapy or radiotherapy, this can be very damaging to the ears. Okay. Right, and then for those of us who perhaps work in noisy industry, or perhaps we like to enjoy music through our headphones, how loud is too loud? There are actually guidelines, to say how loud is too loud. I won't spend too much time in trying to explain this to you because it's quite technical. Just on the left-hand side of the screen, you can see the scale in decibel dB. It just shows how loud the sound level is. And on the right-hand side is the amount of exposure you are allowed to have at that sound loudness before you get hearing loss. So at about 85 decibel, it's about 8 hours. But after 85 decibel, for every 3 decibel increase, the number of exposure time drops by half. So from 8 hours, 4 hours, 2 hours. So by the time it's really loud, for example, if you look at 115 decibel right at the bottom of the chart, the safe exposure time is only 30 seconds. And that is the noise that we get from, that's pretty loud, like firecrackers and things like that. So in fact, if the noise is even louder than that, sometimes if the exposure is just 1 or 2 seconds, we can already sustain hearing loss. Okay. Right. Now, I want to share as well that what a lot of my patients tell me in the clinic, right? They're sitting in front of me, we're chatting away. And then when I try to explain the hearing test result to them, telling them that they have a significant hearing loss, a lot of them say, hey, doctor, but I can still hear you, right? We are having no problem. I can understand you. So see what I mean? I don't have a hearing problem. But of course, it's important to bear in mind that in the clinic environment, it's a bit artificial. The clinics are normally very quiet. And also the doctor and the patient will be sitting facing each other, not too far away. Maybe now with safe distancing, we have a meter gap, but not too far. And then we are looking at each other's face. There's no other people talking. So, this is already the best environment for hearing and understanding. And often I have to remind patients that very often in your life, you do not get to communicate in this sort of ideal environment. Quiet, face to face, you can see each other's face and no one else is talking around you, right? So sometimes if you have family members and you think that they have hearing loss, but they say, no, I don't have hearing loss, some of the things you may ask them to get them to perhaps reflect on how good their hearing actually is, I find that these are useful questions. You can ask your grandparents perhaps, Akong, is your hearing now as good as what it was when you were back in school? Almost certainly they say, of course not, it's not as good. But it's normal, right? As I get older, my hearing goes down. Again, a lot of people say it's normal to lose your hearing. And up to a certain point, yes, we do lose our hearing as you get older. But some people do have excessive hearing loss as they get older. And those are the ones that we need to target and treat. You could also ask them, Akong or Ama, your family members or even yourself, has anyone else, have other people complain to you about your hearing, right? Because often other people would notice about your hearing loss before you notice it yourself. And sometimes they could have noticed it for 5 to 10 years before you yourself notice or acknowledge that there's a hearing problem. Have others complained about the volume that you watch your television? If you are watching television or your iPad or your telephone or your music that you listen to, or the volume that you speak on the telephone, and then asking, can you have a conversation in a noisy place? It doesn't have to be very noisy. Just in the coffee shop, kopitiam, are you able to hold a conversation? And then, are you able to converse when you're in a group situation? For example, you're having dinner together. Are you able to, keep up with the conversation around the table? So I think these are 5 important questions that you can ask yourself or your family members, whether or not you have a hearing loss. And if you answer yes to any of them, likelihood, yes, you do. And the more yes you have, the more likely you have a more significant hearing loss. Okay. Right. Now, at this point, I want to bring up this term, okay, because I think these are important terms for not just doctors, but I think for everyone else to understand as well. I'm sure you have heard terms like impairment, disability, and handicap. And often it's interesting that not many people may not be aware of the differences between these 3 words. So let's look at the 3 words, right? Impairment, it means the loss or reduction of a function of your body or particular organ, right? So you have hearing impairment, right? Your ears are not hearing so well. You have visual impairment. You have cataract or something, you don't see so well. That is the impairment at the level of the organ. Disability refers to the loss or reduction of normal human activities on a personal level. So for example, if you have a hearing impairment, the disability is difficulty communicating with other people, right? Handicap refers to the loss of role and opportunities in society, regards employment, education, and how you function in society. So as I said earlier, hearing impairment leads to difficulties communicating as a disability, and the handicap is unemployment or underemployment or difficulties with your education. Okay. And in fact, within our society, where perhaps it's still quite common for, I suppose, our older parents who may want to help out with looking after our children. So, i.e., they help to look after the grandchildren. So, for example, if you have grandchildren, but you have very bad hearing, and your own children do not trust you to look after your grandchildren because of your hearing, that actually counts as a handicap as well, because you are unable to fulfill your role in society, what is normal in our society. So implications of hearing loss. If I were to ask all of you, right, what happens if you lose your hearing loss, right? What would you do, right? Would most of you say they will go for option 1? They have a hearing loss, they will try to regain the hearing so that they function normally. How many of you put option 1? You can raise your hand now. Okay, I can't see you because your video screens are, quite a lot of you. Okay, well, there's a lot of you. Numbers are going up. Now, the next question is, what about option 2? Okay, if you have hearing loss, you do nothing and you function as a left person. Now, how many of you will raise your hand this time and say, oh, I will prefer to, that will be my option. Okay, a few of you are raising your hand, more than a few. That's fine, I mean, I'm glad you are being honest, and so quite a number of you are raising your hand that I will not do anything, I will function as a deaf person. Because the truth is, right, actually, within my day-to-day job, I find that actually the vast majority of people, despite saying that I would probably do option 1, they would end up going with option 2. So what are the implications then? If you go for option 1, you have an impairment, a hearing impairment. You choose to overcome the impairment. That would mean that you have little or no disability or handicap. Whereas if you go for option 2, you have an impairment, you choose to ignore or deny and not treat it, so it becomes an untreated impairment. That will then lead to you having a significant disability and handicap. So I think these are just points for you all to reflect, right? Now, why is untreated hearing loss bad for you? And for young children, of course, it would affect their education. For working adults, it's a significant factor for unemployment and underemployment, and I do see that in my patients. It affects your communication, it affects your personal safety because you cannot hear what's happening around you. It can also lead to changes in your personality. You tend to be more short-tempered, you tend to be more frustrated. Overall, it will reduce your quality of life, right? It can also lead to social isolation. As previously said already, it will likely accelerate depression, dementia, but also other studies have shown that it will accelerate depression as well. And this thing as well is, it will also lead to the loss of sense of humor, right? Because you are always missing the punchline, right? So if you didn't get that joke, then you may want to get your hearing checked, okay? But anyway, let me move on. What about hearing loss and accidental injuries? Now, do you realize that your risk of accidental injuries is higher if you have hearing loss and you don't do anything about it? Now, recently, there was a major study from the United States on 232 million people. This is a big study, big data, right? And they found that you have an increased risk of accidental injuries if you have hearing loss. And how much is this increased risk? If you have mild hearing loss, it's 20% higher. Moderate hearing loss, 30% higher. And severe hearing loss, 50% higher. You may think, can this be true? You only have to read the newspapers, right? Now, with a lot of people using the personal mobility device, of course, over the last 1 year, there's been many rules, I think the e-scooters are not banned from the footpath, right? But up to the point they were banned, there were so many accidents, right? With many injuries, and some people have lost their life as well. Often this happens in the elderly. The victims are elderly, and I'm sure if we were to study them, we will probably find that a lot of them would have significant hearing loss as well. And then part of the problem is that they cannot hear all these vehicles, the personal mobility devices. Of course, the main responsibility have to be on the rider. But of course, it helps that we are also aware, because accidents can happen, right? And if we know what's happening around us, what's coming our way, we are able to hear, we are able to see properly, then the chances of us being able to get out of the way and avoid the accidents would be much higher. Okay, I just wanted to show you Audiogram is just, I suppose, for your education, for your knowledge. Is because if you were to see a doctor or you were to go to a hearing aid shop to have your hearing tested, they will always do an audiogram. And the audiogram will show you how loud the sound at certain frequencies have to be before you could hear it. And typically 7 frequencies are tested. And then on the left, you can see the categorization of what's normal, mild, moderate, severe, and then severe and profound. Not for you to memorize, but I also wanted to perhaps point this out, that the scale that they use, the decibel scale, is a logarithmic scale, which means that if you look at it, it goes from 0 to 120, right? So it doesn't mean that 120, the sound is 120 times louder than when it's at 0, because for those of you who know mathematics, right, logarithmic, it goes up exponentially. So for example, the threshold of hearing, which for most young people with normal hearing is at 0 decibel. The loudness of sound is 1, right? Your own normal breathing, let's say that is at 10 decibel, is 10 times louder than the threshold of hearing. That means the softest sound that you can hear. By the time you go up to like leaves rustling is 20 decibel, it's already 100 times louder than the softest sound that you can hear. By the time you have normal conversation, which is 60 decibel, that would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1 million times louder. So the sound that you hear at normal conversation is 1 million times louder than the threshold of hearing for a normal person. Okay. Anyway, now, do you recognize the equipment in these photographs? All right. I won't be able to hear your reply, but okay, these are ear trumpets, right? So a long time ago, a century ago, in fact, up to quite recently, if you have hearing problems, this is your only solution. You have to hold one of these up to try to hear. These are called ear trumpets. Okay, imagine if you had to walk around with one of these today, right? I'm sure none of you would want to do that, right? It will look really odd. So what the ear trumpet is trying to do is to increase the amount of sound that your ear can capture. So if you look at our ear, we have this ear lobe, right? And the earlobe actually serves a function, because the function of the earlobe is to try to capture the sound from the environment, and so that we can hear louder. So if we compare the size of our earlobe to other animals, right, we find that human beings, our earlobes are perhaps not as big, proportionately to our body size to other creatures, right? Real and unreal. Okay. So if you want to hear better, instead of using this, you can have this. This is a giant version of the ear trumpet. So if you have one of these, guaranteed you will hear properly. But I'm sure none of you want to wear this, right? So fortunately, you don't have to wear any of those ridiculous devices, right? Because nowadays, we have hearing aids, and they come in all sorts of shapes and sizes. Some of them, like the ones up here behind the ear, they are, probably we don't use them that much anymore because they're quite big and perhaps unsightly to most patients. And then some of the smaller ones are, inside the ear canal, like the one on the right-hand side of the screen called the completely in the canal CIC, virtually invisible. And then the one on the right-hand side of the screen, on the right-hand side, right lower side of the screen, that is called the receiver in canal. This is probably the most popular type of hearing aid now, and I believe it's anything like 70 to 80% of patients going for hearing aid will be going for this type of hearing aid, because even though there's a portion that goes behind the earlobe, you can see that the body is a lot smaller, and it's actually very, very discreet, and you just got a very tiny thing here that goes from the body into the ear, and where the receiver or the loudspeaker is, right? So very discreet now. Okay, so if you were to buy hearing aid, I think most of the time this type of hearing aid will be offered as one of the options for you. Okay, I think it's important for us to also reflect what's happening in society nowadays. I think it's probably fair to say that there's a changing perception on the use of hearing devices. I think before we have Bluetooth, people were trying to see how to put your mobile phone closer to your ear so that you can take a call when you're driving. But nowadays, with all the Bluetooth devices, not necessary anymore. And then, of course, many of you, some of you may remember the era of the Sony headphones, and at that time, the headphones were made to be tiny. But nowadays, the headphones are made to be big and colorful, right? And like the AirPod, so I think there's been a changing perception that nowadays, people seem to want things that are big for hearing, right? They don't necessarily want it to be discreet anymore. They want it colorful, everyone can see what they're wearing. So I think this reflects that perhaps society is changing as well. The stigma of wearing hearing aid are perhaps changing. People are more accepting to be seen walking around with something in your ear to help you hear something, hear music or hear your phone call, right? Yeah. So at the same time, while there's a changing perceptions, a lot of patients are also not seeking help. And these are my own reflection about why patients may not be seeking help. The question is, whose problem is it? Often the patients see as somebody else's problem. I cannot hear you because you are mumbling, you're not talking properly. So they see it as somebody else's problem. And the other problem is the insight, the awareness that they have hearing loss, because the vast majority of people with hearing loss, 99% of people with hearing loss, the hearing loss is a gradual process. Maybe from the age of by the time you're in your 40s and 50s, you start to lose 1% of your hearing every year, 1 to 2%, right? So it's very gradual. So you kind of adapt and not notice it. And after a while, you kind of get used to the silent world, right? And for some people, they say, it's nice. I don't have all the background noise to disturb me. And a lot of people also see it as a normal part of aging. In the same way, they say, oh, getting dementia is normal as you get older. I think for hearing loss, yes, I think it's normal to have a certain level of hearing loss as you get older. But for those of us who have accelerated hearing loss, higher degree of hearing loss than what we should be experiencing, I think we should be, asking whether we should be getting help. And also, I suppose for some patients, there may be lack of understanding and support from family. I have seen quite a lot of patients where I've seen them in the clinic and explain everything to them, and they agree, yeah, okay, I will get hearing aid. And then only for them to come back the next time, they say, oh, my daughter say no need to wear because I'm old already, no need to spend the money. I find perhaps that's a bit sad when the children themselves don't understand the impact the hearing loss can have on their parents and discourage their parents from wearing hearing aid. And perhaps it's a prejudice, it's a stigma. Earlier, I mentioned that some patients say, "Oh, doctor, I do not want to wear hearing aids because I do not want people to think I'm deaf." I have had children or patients coming to tell me, "Doctor, I do not want my father to be wearing hearing aids because I do not want my friends to think that my father is deaf." So the prejudice and stigma is definitely still there. And I suppose affordability may be an issue, but actually, majority of Singaporeans are eligible for subsidized hearing aids from the public hospitals. I also want to reflect a bit or share my reflection on why patients may not get on with their hearing aids. I think the important thing to understand is that there's something called the auditory deprivation effect, where the patient had left it for too long before they seek help for the hearing loss and before they wear hearing aid. So the trouble with this is that, for example, if you have left your hearing loss for 30 years, you ignored it for 30 years, and by the time you seek help for your hearing loss, you have severe hearing loss, your brain, I use the word brain because at the end of the day, it's the brain that hears, right? It's not your ears that hear, because what the ears do is that it picks up all the vibration, the sound vibration, it converts it into electrical signal and sends it to your brain. And your brain has to interpret the sound, whether this is conversation, a speech, somebody saying something, or whether it's background noise that can be ignored. So unfortunately, if you have had hearing loss for a long time, you tend to not have heard background noise for a long time. Your brain would have forgotten what background noise sounds like. The traffic noise, people chattering in the background, the sound of your aircon, your washing machine, the fan. The trouble then is when you start wearing hearing aids, you start to listen to all this normal background noise again. In a person with normal hearing, right, your brain is smart enough to know, okay, this is background noise, this is traffic noise, this is the sound of the washing machine. The brain learns to ignore the noise and focus on conversation, focus on what someone else is saying. But if you have been deaf for a long time and you start wearing hearing aid, you need to give your brain time to get used to all the sound again, for your brain to relearn what is background noise so that the brain can ignore those noises and focus on what someone else is saying. So this is quite an important concept as to why, it will take a while for patients to get used to hearing aids. And often they say the sound is too loud, it's distorted. Again, it goes back to the first phenomenon. They still have poor speech understanding when there's background noise. Now, I have to say that a lot of my patients, even those of them who have successfully worn hearing aid, this would be the commonest complaint that they still have 5 years down the line. And this is the one problem that is perhaps the hardest to solve, right? And I think the hearing aids are getting better and better, the technology and all that. But I think it's important to manage the expectation that even after with hearing aids, when there's a lot of background noise, when there are a lot of people talking, you are likely to still have some difficulties. And the truth is that even people with normal hearing have difficulties. So I think it's important to manage your expectation rightly. The other problem that I see sometimes that is the fitting of the hearing aid. Sometimes the amplification is not loud enough. The type of hearing aid is perhaps not suitable. They have quite severe hearing loss and they go for the tiny hearing aid, which are perhaps not powerful enough. So the type of hearing aid, the level of amplification is important. And sometimes they just need better hearing aid. They may have a hearing aid that is 10 years old. Sometimes they need to upgrade, get a up-to-date one. Or sometimes they need other hearing devices like implants, if their hearing loss are really bad. And a lot of patients have unrealistic expectations. But I don't always blame the patients for that, because I think it's important for all the professionals, doctors, audiologists. Audiologists are allied health professionals who are trained, to help patients with hearing problems. In fact, I would say the average audiologist will understand hearing better than the average ENT doctor, right? So these people are the real experts, the audiologists. So I think it's important for all healthcare professionals to work together, and also when we counsel patients to make sure that they have a realistic expectation. In fact, whilst I encourage my patients to go for hearing aid, I often set the expectation quite low. I don't promise a lot to them. I'll tell them that it's going to take a while for them to get used to the hearing aid. It's going to be noisy initially. They got to wear the hearing aid regularly before they can hear well. I set the expectation low for my patients because I find that it's better you set it low. And then if the hearing aid exceeds expectation, they'll be very happy. But if you set the expectation very high, you tell them that, oh, you wear your hearing aid, you will hear clearly immediately. You have no problem. Even in noise, you can understand everybody. I think if you set the expectation too high, and then the patient will bound to be disappointed. So I think it's important. This is perhaps more for the healthcare professionals to be realistic about what they tell patients. And as I said earlier, this lack of understanding and social support also important. I also hear a lot from patients that they want to wait till their hearing is bad enough before they get hearing aids. And unfortunately, what I'm seeing is that most patients are waiting far too long. And the saddest situation that I encounter all the time is when I see children or grandchildren bringing their parents or grandparents in already with dementia and asking me to fit or arrange for hearing aids to be fitted to their relative who already has dementia. At that point, I will need to counsel them carefully, and I would say I need to tell them that the more severe the dementia is, the less likely that this person will accept the hearing aids. Because for a person to accept hearing aid, they need to have a certain degree of cognitive functioning. You need to be able to educate, counsel them. They need to be able to rationalize, learn how to use the hearing aid. So a patient with severe dementia, and they are not already, and with hearing loss, and they are not already using hearing aid, it will be very, very difficult. I'm not saying it's impossible, but I'm sure if there's any audiologists in the audience, they will agree with me as well. So, and that is the sad thing, that people say, I will wait till my hearing loss is bad enough. But unfortunately, sometimes when they come, when the hearing loss is bad enough, they also have dementia already. And often when you look through the medical notes, this patient would have been first seen in our department like 20 years ago, 30 years ago. And we would have found from the record that the hearing loss was already there 20 years ago, 30 years ago, but the patient chose to ignore and not do anything. So funding for hearing aids in Singapore, I'll just go through the slide very quickly. It's just to let you know, not to worry, there are various funds available. So for those who may not be able to afford the hearing aids, if you approach the public hospitals, there are many funds that we can approach. Some of the funds are for people above the age of 60, below the age of 60, there are other funds as well. So not for you to memorize these slides. And sometimes we do have charitable organizations like Lions who have helped sponsor hearing aids in the past, and probably now as well. And all this will assessment, evaluation for funding will go to the medical social workers in the hospital. I want to quickly mention about tinnitus as well, that it's interesting that I do see many patients who come to the clinic complaining of tinnitus, but not hearing loss. And then it's interesting that 90% of them, when you test the hearing, you will find that they have some degree of hearing loss. It's just that they are aware of the tinnitus, but not the hearing loss. So tinnitus is just being aware of a noise that only they can hear, but other people cannot hear. And the important fact to take home here is that if you have tinnitus and you have hearing loss, one of the best treatment is to use a hearing aid. Because with the hearing aid, you hear better, and the hearing aids have been proven for most patients that it will help them reduce the perception of tinnitus. Hearing loss and driving, again, this is important, that the Singapore Medical Association has some guidelines on your fitness to drive, and your hearing level have to be at least 50 decibel for you to drive a car. And this can be either unaided or aided. So if your hearing threshold is higher than 50 decibel, these are in the lower frequencies, you can still drive as long as you wear a hearing aid, so that when you wear a hearing aid, you can hear the sound when it's softer, right? So this is an important point, that if you have hearing loss and you don't treat it, you could end up be driving illegally. Now, I'm nearly coming to the end now. This is another $1 million questions. And a lot of my patients ask me that. They say, doctor, which brand of hearing aid would you recommend? Okay, how would I answer this question? This is how I will answer. I would say, okay, which car brand is the best? Usually they'll say, oh, I'm driving a Toyota, so Toyota is the best. But they will also, of course, accept that, different people will give different answers. Some people will say Honda, some people will say the Volkswagen, so, or like television, which brand is the best? OG, Samsung, Sony. I don't think there can be a good answer to this question, right? What I can probably say, and what is probably true, is that all the hearing aids that are available in Singapore, available through the public hospitals or private hearing aid shops, they are all good, all right? And it's a case of identifying the hearing aid that perhaps suits you best, you know, the features and all that. So I don't think there's a best hearing aid brand, okay? And then I would go as far as to say that, to make this statement that may upset some people initially, I would say that buying hearing aids is not the treatment for hearing loss. I'm making this statement purely for the fact that a lot of my patients who see me for hearing loss, many of them have bought hearing aids before. Some of them have bought multiple sets of hearing aids before, and they end up in the drawer. They end up not using the hearing aids. So I would say that if you just buy the hearing aid and don't use them, your hearing loss have not been treated, right? So buying the hearing aid that alone will not treat the hearing loss. To treat the hearing loss, right, I make a statement here. Hearing loss can only be treated if you can successfully wear your hearing aids long-term and overcome all your hearing disabilities and handicaps. Grammatically, I think the sentence is a bit wrong, but I think I meant to say that making sure that your hearing disabilities and handicaps are addressed. That would be the treatment, right? So the hearing aid is the treatment, but you have to be able to wear them successfully, long-term, regularly, right? So my advice to you when you're thinking of buying a hearing aid is that find yourself a good audiologist, a hearing professional, ENT doctor, audiologist, someone who can counsel you, educate you, and advise you properly, help you manage your expectation, and they will hold your hands in your hearing journey. So when you wear hearing aid, that is only the beginning of treating your hearing loss. There will be a journey ahead, a journey of letting your brain get used to the hearing aid. Okay, so I'd like to end with another video just to show you what the future is like with hearing aids. And in fact, the future is already here. Okay. Future is already here, right? Now, and this is just one example of videos made by hearing aid companies. I got another 5 to 6 videos. They're all showing amazing things, but I don't have the time to share with you all these videos. But I do encourage you to go to YouTube and look up all these wonderful videos made by the different hearing aid companies, right? So as I said, I would never say which hearing aid is best. In fact, I don't get any funding from the hearing aid industry, right, for my research work. So I'm neutral in this aspect. I just want to end my talk by the summary, which I showed you earlier. If you suspect you have hearing loss, go get yourself tested. If your hearing loss is impacting your communication, hearing aids can help you reconnect with family. You'll find it harder to wear hearing aid for the first time, the longer you have hearing loss and the more severe your hearing loss is. And hearing loss is a significant risk factor for dementia. And it's also very much harder to start wearing hearing aids once you have dementia. And that's the end of my talk. And just to remind, with the upcoming general election, that our Prime Minister is a dedicated hearing aid user and a proud hearing aid user for at least the last 10 years. Thank you very much.
Wow, thank you very much, Dr. Ho. That was a very engaging talk and very useful. I'm getting a lot of positive feedback from, we have about 370 people now actually watching the talk. So
Wow.
let's get to some of the questions. So people have voted for questions that they would like answered. So I'll read the questions out to you.
Okay. Yeah.
So the first question is, if I have vertigo, is it an indication of hearing issues in the near future?
Okay, great question. And to answer this properly, I need Brahm Center to invite me back to give another talk on vertigo. I think it's a big topic. It's also my first love in life is hearing loss. Second love is vertigo. My answer to that would be most of the time, no. Most of the time, vertigo problem happen independently from hearing problems. Even though the organ for balance and organ for hearing are actually together in the ear, the cochlea and the vestibule. Cochlea is for hearing, vestibule is for balance. They are located side by side. I would say for most of my patients, no, these are independent problems, and usually not a prediction that if you have vertigo now, you will get hearing loss in the future.
Thank you, Dr. Ho. About going for a checkup, you mentioned that to go for a test, would the proper route be to go to a polyclinic and then they can refer a person to an ENT specialist for a hearing test? Is that correct?
That would be, yes, one of the route. And in fact, we do, I think all the public hospitals do see a large number of patients referred from the polyclinic. I suppose one of the advantages of coming to a public hospital is that you will get to see both the ENT doctor to have your ears assessed clinically to make sure that there's no other problems with the ear, and then to go for a hearing test afterwards. But I suppose the truth is that the vast majority of people that we see, they don't have another significant problem with the ear. So most of them have this presbyacusis or age-related hearing loss. So I suppose there's probably no harm for the majority of people, the vast majority, to, if you wanted to go to a private hearing aid shop, and if they can do a hearing test for you, that is also another route. I would say one of the key difference to consider is that if you think you are eligible for subsidized hearing aids, then you need to go through the polyclinic route to be referred to a public hospital. Because as of now, if you are buying hearing aids from outside, then you cannot get the government subsidy.
Thank you, Dr. Ho. So many people are asking about earwax. So maybe I'll ask the more complicated question here. So good afternoon. This person's husband is 71 years old and has a lot of earwax. He uses an ear pick to clean. The ENT specialist cannot remove the earwax immediately and needs to soften it with olive oil, and then back to the specialist to and fro to remove. So this seems to be affecting his hearing. How can this person reduce wax in the ear, and what are the other tools in the market available?
Wow. Okay. So this question is about a particular patient. I suppose I cannot give an answer that is directly for that patient because I have not seen that patient before. I'll just give some general answer, facts about wax. Okay. So I would say that probably 95% of people do not need to clean their ears, right? The earwax that we produce is a natural process, is the way our ears clean our ears clean themselves, right? The wax should come up of the ears gradually. But maybe 5% of people, they may have excessive amount of wax, and the wax don't come up by themselves. But a lot of the patients that I see with this, what we call impacted earwax, where the wax is stuck in the ear, I would say the majority of the time is because of the patient's own habit of cleaning the ears with cotton buds. And what some of them end up doing is that they end up pushing in the earwax deep into the ear, and then the earwax gets stuck. So I would say a lot of the time when we see problems, it's probably due to patient's own habit, but I don't blame them, because I think when you got itchy ear, most of us would probably want to dig the ear with something. So is there anything we can do to prevent? I would say using the earwax softener that you can buy over the counter from your local pharmacy, you know, Guardian or Watson's. That may work for some people. In the hospital, we like to use olive oil drops. But I think the key to the drops working is not to wait until the ears are completely blocked, then they start using the drops. I think this is another mistake that a lot of patients do. They will wait. Let's say they come and see me and the ears are full of wax, and I remove the wax, and they say, "Oh, thank you very much, my ears are clear." Then I will give them some olive oil. I will tell them, "Oh, try to use this regularly," but they end up not using it. Then they come back a year later, 6 months later, and they say, "Oh, doctor, oh, my ears got wet, blocked again." Then I say, "Oh, did you not use the olive oil regularly, like every 2 weeks, 3 weeks that I advise you?" You know, they say, "Oh, I didn't." Then my ear got blocked 1 month ago. Then I started using. Then they'll say that the eardrops don't help remove the earwax. So I would say that the eardrops tend not to help when the ears are almost completely or completely blocked. So after you've been to see a doctor to have the earwax removed, perhaps consider using the earwax every 2 to 3 weeks. Don't wait for the earwax wax to build up. What the softeners do is that they soften the earwax and make the earwax easier to come out on their own.
Thank you, Dr. Ho. So there's a question, how do we care for our hearing?
Okay, great question, and I'm glad you are asking. I think for the vast majority of us, we are lucky. As I said, we are not at risk of chronic ear infections. Obviously, if you are unlucky enough to have regular infections of your ear, you have burst eardrum, a hole in your eardrum, you should see a doctor, ENT doctor, and have that treated. But that's a small minority. So I think the most significant risk factor for hearing loss in our community after aging, and aging, you can't do anything about that, we all get older, is noise exposure. And most of us are not working in noisy industries, you know, because there's less and less noisy heavy industries in Singapore, you know. But I think it's a recreational noise exposure. So I think for those of us who like to listen to our personal music player, be very, very careful about how loud you put the volume at. And I'm sure all of you have been on, if you've been on public transport, on the MRT or on the bus, you will have come across someone else who is listening to music with a headphone, and they will have it so loud that you can hear the music, and you are sat like 5, 6 feet away from this person, right? I'm sure you've all encountered that. So can you imagine how loud it will be for that person? I think the real difficulty is that for people who are commuting, especially if they're taking the bus or even the MRT, the noise level inside the bus and MRT can be very, very, very high. So what most people tend to do is that they turn up the volume of the music to be even louder than the background noise, so that they can enjoy the music or the movie that they are watching. And here lies the problem, because our environment is noisy, and then we have to turn up the volume of what we want to listen to louder. So actually there is one simple solution to this, but actually it involves spending some money. I'm sure you've heard of all those noise cancellation headphones, the technology where it blocks out the background noise. They are not cheap. I think they start from about $100 or so. But I think if you really want to care for your hearing and you listen to music regularly when you commute, then I would urge that is one good investment. Get some good noise cancelling headphones and then listen to that. And you'll find that, wow, once you start using, you'll be having your volume at 1/3 or 1/2 of what you used to have. I've tried this on the plane before. for a long flight. Of course, I think we won't be flying for a while, but previously when I was on the flight, I used the headphone that the airline gives, and then I would find that, gosh, I need to have the volume at maximum before I could hear the conversation. But after I invested in a good pair of noise reducing headphones, suddenly I found, my goodness, I could reduce the volume and I could hear clearer than before. So this is one tip that I think I'd like to share with everyone.
Thank you, Dr. Ho. So noise cancelling earphones aside, does it matter, especially now when we are working from home and using earphones so often, does it matter what type of earphone we use? Is it over-the-ear headphone or earbuds? Do they matter?
Okay. I think the most important thing is not to have the volume too loud. And as long as the volume is not too loud, then whether it's in the ear or over the ear, I don't think it matters that much. Probably the only comment is that if you have a tendency to have a wax problem, right, then you might want to get something over the ear rather than something that goes into your ear that may end up pushing the wax further in. So for people with wax problem or you are prone to getting ear infections, then over the ear are likely to be better and more comfortable as well.
Thank you, Dr. Ho. We have a lot of good questions. Maybe we'll take a few more because it's already 4:30. One question is, this person's father has dementia and his hearing has deteriorated. Recently, we noticed twice that he has earwax formed the size of a raisin. Is this a cause for concern?
Okay. Again, I think the patient needs to be assessed by a doctor, and sometimes even though there seems to be a lot of wax, the wax may not be blocking the ear completely and they could still hear. So the wax may or may not be contributing to the hearing problem. I think definitely for this particular person, best to get it checked because there is a chance that the presence of earwax may be contributing to the hearing problem, and removing the earwax will probably improve the hearing to a certain extent. But then depending on the level of the hearing loss from aging and noise exposure and all other things, then they may still need help with the hearing.
Thank you, Dr. Ho. So I think all those who are asking questions about particular conditions, is best to get the assessment done by a doctor.
Yes, I would strongly urge that. I think whenever we give talks to the public, is always we try to give general principles. I try to answer some of the questions that I get asked frequently, and I'm sorry if I didn't address some of them because I suppose there are actually many questions that are asked frequently, and I suppose like those questioning about vertigo, maybe a separate talk to address that. And tinnitus, wax, I'm not sure there'll be sufficient demand for a talk just on earwax. I don't know. So again, maybe you can feedback to Brahm Center whether there's a demand for other topics to do with the ear. And then maybe what we could consider doing in the future is that if you are going to contact Brahm Center, request for talks, maybe to request for sending the questions beforehand, and I'll try to answer them. But yeah, I think generally, even if I were to answer the questions, my advice would still be, it's always best to seek professional advice because everyone is different, and yeah, the condition can probably be best managed after you had a professional opinion into the exact nature of the problem. And also the treatment can be personalized to that individual.
Thank you, Doctor. We'll end off with this last question. Does wearing earplugs daily during sleep time cause any hearing problems or loss over time?
Wearing earplugs should not cause hearing loss unless your earplugs, you push them really far in and you cause the wax to be pushed down into the ear canal against the eardrum. Then you can have a form of hearing loss called a conductive hearing loss, where the sound vibration cannot get to the eardrum. So it's possible to induce hearing loss with wearing earplugs, not just when you're asleep, but when you're awake. So this is one of the problems with earplugs, that for some people with maybe they are prone to having excessive amount of wax to begin with, then the earplugs can make the problem worse. But shouldn't damage the hearing organ directly. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Ho. So it's 4:30 now. Thank you very much for your time. Perhaps we will see you again for more ear-related talks in the future.
Okay, yeah. So thank you, Yu Ping, and thank you to everyone who have listened in, and thank you for posing your question, and apologize for not being able to answer every single one of these questions. Thank you and have a good weekend ahead.
So thank you very much once again, and we will see you soon.